We at RFAS are medical device engineers. We help MedTech startups develop and certify their medical devices. Besides our regular work, we love talking to our clients, exchanging views, stories, experience, anecdotes from the MedTech industry. We often find ourselves comparing success, failure, and trying to find what is the key aspect of making commercialization of a medical device a successful one. Wouldn't it be good to cover this type of topics with the experts from the industry, with the medical device seniors who have been through it all successfully few times over? And it is my pleasure today to have here with me Niek Schreuder. Niek, you are primarily a medical physicist. In fact, you are the fellow of American Association of Physicists in Medicine. But I don't want to talk to you about your fellowships. I'd like to talk to you as a person who is an innovator, an entrepreneur, and has been a visionary in the field of proton therapy. Niek, I'm just going to call you one of the pioneers of proton therapy. Is that okay with you?
That would be fine. Thank you.
So for today, it would be great to hear firsthand your take on MedTech innovation. Specifically, what it takes to bring an idea through the development of a medical device and then sell it successfully. So I was thinking, where do we start? I might as well start right at the beginning. So, Niek, would you kindly share with us what it was that made you decide for a career in medical physics? And specifically, what was it that made you choose proton therapy?
Great, Igor. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share my background and history and the path to medical physics with you in this forum. I grew up in South Africa in Cape Town, and it was about just more than 40 years ago that I graduated from high school and had to kind of figure out a career path. And then at that time, everybody wanted to work in Cape Town, but business and industry was more up in Johannesburg area. So after I finished my bachelor's degree in physics and chemistry, it was just about the time that the nuclear power station was built in Cape Town. At that time, probably the only one in the southern hemisphere, or at least the only one in Cape Town, in South Africa. And I thought, if I go into radiation physics, I can get a job at the nuclear power station back in Cape Town. So I embarked on a radiation physics class, and I did a year in, and that goes into health physics or medical physics. But the first time I stepped into a cancer treatment hospital environment was in 1983. And at that time, a lot of people were still dying from cancer. The cure rates were bad, especially also in South Africa. And I was just at the brink of new medical imaging, so things changed tremendously. But I just felt this is kind of not my area. And so I went to work for 4 years in health physics. That's radiation protection and the nuclear industry. But I just felt called back to medicine to help people in that perspective, So I did get my job at the nuclear power station, but that was the same time that I then also was asked by the University Hospital of Stellenbosch, Tygerberg Hospital, to come back into medical physics. So I started my residency there, come back to the medical physics, and they were also overseeing the neutron treatments at the lab in Cape Town. So I went there and I started working at the neutron facility, first neutron treatments, and then that's really what I learned and saw the value of medical physics in proton therapy. And so I joined the proton therapy project there at that time. So that's a long road, but wanting to live in Cape Town, learning about radiation therapy, and ended up in medical physics.
Yeah, just if you remind us how back that was in late.
Well, I qualified as a medical physicist in 1989 after the 2-year residency.
You started your career as a medical physicist in a clinical setup back in South Africa. Then you moved to the US, where you joined Procure and later on Provision as again a medical physicist. But now you're back in a startup again. You're back in the startup mode. Specifically, you are the president of Leo Cancer Care. And again, you're the innovators in the radiation therapy space. Tell me, what was the main motivation behind the new venture?
Yeah, so let me step a little bit back. So after I started in Cape Town at the Nuclear National Accelerator Center, we treated our first patient with proton therapy in 1993, which was kind of a homemade system. There was really no rules and regulations other than the safety of the patient. So we made a system, we treated a patient. I just became totally aware of the value and the benefit of proton therapy and the benefits to the nation. But South Africa is a small country, and many regards one could say the need for first world medicine was probably not as defined. And so an opportunity came up for me to move to Indiana University, where they also built, they had an accelerator and we need to convert that to a medical device. And the accelerator was kind of the similar one. The proton accelerator in Cape Town was the version 2 of the machine that was built at Indiana University. So they recruited me to come and help with building that facility. We did that, treated the first patient in 2004. I moved in 2001. 2004, we built the first machine and just realized this technology need to get out to the people. So I became a startup member with Procure Treatment Centers, and there I served as the senior vice president of medical physics and technology. So I was kind of driving the technology, and we formulated a concept, totally innovative concept of what do we need to actually take this out to the people, get more people treated with protons. Now, looking back, that was probably 10 years too early. There was just too many fundamental things that was in our way to make that successful. Now, we were extremely successful. We built 4 proton therapy centers, but there was a couple of fundamental principles that were wrong. And that led to the demise of Procure as a company. So then after that, when Procure didn't succeed financially, just too much of a debt burden, these centers were too much money and not enough patients, I joined Provision Healthcare, which was a combination of providing medical services plus innovative, and Provision Healthcare ran a component, Pronova Solutions, that also developed proton therapy systems from scratch. So here I had a clinical angle plus an innovative angle, was really great. But yet Pronova developed the world's smallest superconducting based gantry and still struggled to make the sales. And so about 2 years ago, I joined forces with Rock Mackey, started talking about what we really need. And that's the thing that then led us to Leo Cancer Care. Finally, I was in a position where I can now really implement the massive paradigm shift that I've been advocating. The first paper that kind of setting the scene of what we're doing right now was, I wrote that paper in 1998 while I was still in Cape Town. So I'm excited to walk you through the path and what drove me and the excitement of what we're doing today in the Leo Cancer Care environment.
Can you share us your experience in bringing a new medical device to market?
Great, yeah, Igor, this is a really good question, and clearly this is a question that one can spend a lot of time on. But the first thing that comes to mind when you ask me this question is, how do you define a new medical device? Is it something that changed the paradigm completely? Is it something where you have to learn or teach people to eat a different type of cereal. If they eat a certain cereal every morning, how do you change them to eat a different type of cereal? So that's the one category, and it's by far it's probably the most difficult one when you have to change the paradigm. The other devices is just do it in a slightly different way, but still doing the same thing. And so when I joined Procure, we really realized we need to try and shrink the size of these facilities and do something different. So we started pushing on the angle and say, really, do we really need to have these big rotating gantries, or can we come with a mix and say reducing some of these rotating gantries? So we try to change the paradigm, but not completely. So instead of having just a fixed beam line that what we do right now in Leo and focusing on the patient side, we said, could we just reduce the number of angles? And we came with a device that had limited gantry angles. That was pretty easy. We had a convincing story to say, yes, we can still treat the same number of patients. But for my own, luckily today I can, when something goes wrong and you could go back and let me say tongue in the cheek, if you can blame somebody else, that always is great. If you step out, and as long as you can blame somebody else, then at least you protect yourself. So I can claim that 3 of the prerequisites that I actually demanded for that new product was never put in place, and only recently. So that product received eventually a lot of criticism to say, really it cannot work, but it was compromised what we actually had in mind. So going back to that fundamental question is are you trying to change the paradigm, or are you just bringing another thing? So one thing that was highly successful was bringing a new robotic positioner to the table. So that was never, that positioner was made its way into the market, and many of them were built and people loved it. And of course it was just setting the tone for somebody else to come with something better. I mean, so that's the other thing is when you go and build a device, don't ever think this is the last one that ever is going to be built, right? It's one step at a time. So
do you see a big difference between, let's say, introducing a new robotic device which effectively automizes the positioning, which is not a paradigm shift, of course, it's just automation in a way, compared to another device, getting rid of a gantry altogether and make the whole proton therapy completely different? So is this the...
Right. So let's go back to the robotic device. So there, it's a robotic device, but again, when we entered that field, robots was designed, and that is true. I mean, these robots were perceived as one of the most dangerous devices out in the industry, and now instead of the robot going out of control and hitting somebody at very high speed, you want to put a patient on that device. And I have to give credit to Alejandro Mazal and the folks in Paris. I mean, they were the first people to take an industrial robot, slow it down, and make it sure it's safe and can never harm the patient. And we did the same thing at Indiana University. But when I joined Procure, we said we really want to have a medical robotic device, and we did that. So we were able to show that this machine is now a medical device. It was introduction of safe robot technology in the robotic industry that then suddenly allowed workers to actually be inside the robot work envelope. Before that, you had to put a cage around the machine, and nobody is allowed in that envelope while the machine is operating, welding cars together.
Yeah.
So when you go that way, the frustrating thing there is we still did not use this thing as a robot. I used it a little bit to pick up devices and have couplers on it and more in automation. But a lot of people didn't want to make that paradigm shift. They said, let's just use it the same thing as the only slow-moving man-made device. So there was a little bit of frustration, but nevertheless, that device was doing something similar. Was not doing what I had initially in mind. But maybe, and that's one of the pitfalls we can discuss as we go through this roadmap of things.
Yeah. Okay. Can you give us your view of the innovation path, the way you see it?
Yeah. So there's one key aspect. If you don't know the field, then don't even try and innovate. So innovation is all about knowing what is needed and developing then what is needed. I've seen many times in my life that people develop. Once it was one of my mentors in South Africa said, this guy developed an incredible tool, a great tool without an application. So a lot of times we get so intrigued with what we believe in and what we love the field, and we go out and we just say, what the industry really need is this, and you go on this tangent and say we need this machine that can do everything, even peeling the bananas. Yeah. But there's no need for the bananas to be peeled in that concept, right?
So in other words, you're saying don't invent for the inventing's sake. Invent for the market, yeah.
So you need to invent something that will truly have an impact down the road. And here's a very big challenge. What is that impact in your own mind? Is that also the impact in other people's mind? So the innovation path starts with finding what is that product that will make a difference. Because if it doesn't make a difference, and if it doesn't make a financial difference, the financial guy is not going to look at it. If it doesn't make a clinical difference, the doctors are not going to look like it. And if it doesn't benefit the patient, ultimately, you're just wasting your time. And that's, of course, I'm talking about medical devices here. So what you have to do is you have to say, what is it that we need? And what is that thing that will make this difference? And then drive it back, set up that set of specifications, requirements. What does this thing need to be able to do? And then stick to the guns. I cannot give more advice to people than stick to the guns. Now, if I say stick to the guns, you have your product defined. I've also seen that the field can change tremendously fast. And in my 30 years in the industry, I'd seen things, and I had to eat my hat a couple of times. That saying about, I say this is how it's going to work, and 5 years later, I have to admit, maybe I did not have the full vision.
So it's maybe a connection between first defining the product, but at the same time, you define also the market as you do it. That product needs to fit somewhere. And by the time you've developed it, you better have the market still there for it.
Right, and that's the point, is that I love a slogan that says, and I Googled, I tried to figure out who said it, but I believe it's an old American Indian saying that they said, if you discover you're riding a dead horse, the best strategy is to dismount and get on another horse, right? And sometimes a great innovation can become a dead horse soon if the market change or if the industry change, right? And I can come up with many examples of where we believe. I was reading back something that I wrote in 2003, and I really had to eat my hat on that, only because technologies that I thought was further out was able to develop faster. And today, but don't dwell there. I mean, don't be married to a specific idea. Now, that's a huge no-no if you keep on changing scope, right? So new entrepreneurs and people need to understand that you cannot change. At some point, you cannot change scope. I was told that if NASA or anybody shooting something up to outer space, they're doing it literally with 5-year-old technology. Because they always want to use the latest chip and the latest computer, they'll never get the thing up there. But this is probably the hardest thing to navigate through in an arena like the proton therapy that changed so rapidly in the last 15 years.
So what do you think are the biggest hurdles and pitfalls for a medical device startup?
Yeah, I have no doubt that the biggest hurdle is to convince people that what you are planning to do or what you're innovating or what you're changing kind of is needed, and let the people understand. So you have to understand the radiation therapy, and of course I'm a medical physicist treating cancer patients, involved in cancer patient treatments. That there's a certain paradigm, and these doctors goes through many years of training to train and do something in a certain way. But one of my biggest pluses in my life is that I grew up on a farm, not in a very sheep farm in rural South Africa, and the nearest mechanic is 20, 30, 50 miles away. And so when something breaks or you have to solve a problem, you kind of had to figure it out. And with my bit of technical background, that's how I grew up, right? So I then come into the medical physics field, and I see this is something that just done a certain way because of history or a paradigm shift, and really can do with new thinking. Now go to people that is just completely focused on safety, and you hardly ever hear me talk about safety, because safety for me is inherent to what I'm doing. I'm living and dying by safe devices, but how do you bring a new device and try and convince people it's safe? And so that's where the FDA and people come in. The people think about the FDA as a body that governs safety. And my friend Jay Flans he sums it up the best way. He said, prove to yourself something is safe, and then tell the FDA what you did. So now I'm making a long circle here, but the problem is that how do you convince people that what you are going to do is going to be safe and is going to do the benefit of the patient and is worthwhile, right?
So it's, if I may jump in, it's interesting to see from an engineer, from a scientist, that to confirm that the most difficult part in or the biggest pitfall or obstacle is really convince the client or the customer, the market, that they need and how they can use that device. In your particular case, the biggest hurdle was obviously safety. And in many medical devices, that is the case. And it seems to me that this communication with the market and the change that you need to instill in the user seems to me the most difficult part.
Yeah, I mean, so what I'm trying to say is people don't want to change because of that fear of change bring uncertainty, and suddenly you have something that do something different, and it's now not doing the same thing as it's been done the last 15 years. And how do I know this would remain safe and comfortable to the patient? All those other parameters come in. So it's really the fear for change. So that the biggest hurdle then is to be able to convince people that this device is needed, right?
Nick, what were your biggest challenges on your innovation path, and how did you approach them?
Yeah, so this is just a personal testimony, you know. So I told you how I grew up on the farm and how we built the first center in Cape Town and the homemade systems. But when you come into this medical device business, we talked about safety. For me, the biggest hurdle was to have to follow this incredibly regimented design process. And one of the pitfalls, one of the things we struggled in Indiana University was the paperwork, just the paperwork, to get the paperwork right. And I think we started the paper trail about 2 or 3 times. And still, if you ask me today, what is the real names of these documents, design requirements, design specifications, that was my biggest hurdle, to come into that extreme discipline roadmap, to not go and build the thing until you have it fully designed, to not write a single piece of code until you know exactly what you need to write. Because as an innovator and something I'm doing at my house, if I want to just build a barn, I just go and build the barn. You know, I do Google SketchUp a little bit and design a little bit, but following that totally regimented paper trail, which is extremely important. The challenge is to what is enough, and what is enough to show to the FDA the process that you followed to, and I just use FDA because there's the American context, it's the European context of the CE, but you have to follow that path to convince yourself it's safe, and then just tell them what you do. If you can follow that principle, then it's not about satisfying a paper trail. It's about just documenting what you have done so that the system will remain safe and adjustable and upgradable for the next 20 years of the life cycle of that product. So
correct. In fact, the safety culture, if you like, is embedded in the process of quality management process, in the way you think, in the philosophy about the development. I have to agree with that. And if you look, let's say, FDA standards for ensuring safety back then when you were doing things, I bet you see those the paperwork has increased manifold since then.
Absolutely, and I blame engineers, and I'm not blaming the bureaucrats for that. I'm blaming the people that we keep on not understanding what is the ultimate goal. I blame the people that are not understanding this principle of prove to yourself it's safe, and then tell the people what you've done. Now, people then go out, and there's great methods of failure mode element analysis and stuff. And I remember one day we were sitting in Indiana University where we were building the IU facility, And we spend about 8 hours just figuring out what to do if an earthquake comes up, right? And so you have to go debate this thing, and that's just a total waste of time. That whole thing about earthquake could probably be answered very quickly. But we did work with a bunch of newcomers to the field, and that's why it's very, very important to, in a startup device company, to get a good grip on the paperwork and the paper trail. And it's almost like you have a newborn baby, and the parents of this newborn baby now start listening to advice of all the grandparents and all the friends and that had babies before them, and you're just confused. So the important advice here is to saddle up one horse and ride that horse in terms of the paper trail, because that is your primary focus, to stick to timelines and not to drift completely into an undefined space, because you just don't know. The documents doesn't talk to each other, the documents doesn't gel, the requirements doesn't tie back to the tests, and all that stuff.
Yes, so it means embracing your quality management system and paperwork head on right at the beginning, and you're probably safer along the path, man.
Yeah, but as I said, as an innovator or an entrepreneur, this is very, very hard. That is still, I'm still on that bandwagon, because you want to see that end product. I mean, you want to see that thing working, right?
What was the most rewarding thing about commercializing your innovations?
Yeah, so I go back to that robotic positioner that we built in the Procure environment. So we came in and say, can we build a device that is truly, truly better? So I spent a lot of time modeling it out, and I can still recall the meetings with the engineer and say, what if you change the paradigm this way? What if you do this? And he said, Nick, I can build you any robot you want, because my paradigm was always, I have to stick to what's commercially available. At the end of the day, he said, as long as you just use the same motors and gearboxes and the same control software, doesn't matter the length of the arms, you can, of these robots, you can make any robot you want, and you just have to bear in mind the strengths and stuff. So we came up with this Schreuder type robot that had one translation and 5 rotations, and we built that device. But the most rewarding moment was when I got that letter from the FDA that this device now is FDA approved, and it was FDA approved, I think, about 30 or 15 or 30 days before the first patient was supposed to be treated. That was really rewarding to see that device. And then people just loved that device. I think that device, we ended up installing more than 100 of them in 100 proton therapy treatment rooms across the world. And yet it was not the device that I initially had in mind in terms of automation, but it is a device that really, and I was honored that even the person that was my mentor in the robotics, Alejandro Mazal's group, actually purchased that device. They installed that device because they just decided that this device is actually doing what they always had in mind. And so that was rewarding to see that device being accepted. And then even more rewarding than that is to see that other group was then able to come with a device that was better than ours, right? And so today ours is not used anymore because that spearheaded the development of a device that is better, right? And
so you felt like you set out the spirit out of the bottle, and then you saw a new direction in patient positioning system.
Right, and that brings another thing to mind is that a lot of people think, what I invent now should be protected and make sure that nobody else can copy it. I mean, I know there's a business angle to it, but as soon as you start protecting your stuff, all you do is you're not an enabler. I 100% believe in the medical industry, we need to all be enablers to say, yes, here's what I built. I mean, you can't have my stuff, you can't have my designs, but let's take on that challenge and see if you can come and build something better, because who's benefiting at the end? It is the patient. And it's the industry, and that's really what we need to focus on.
Looking back, is there something that you would have done differently now in your new ventures, specifically on your innovation path in medical device development?
Yeah, I think there's certainly many things, but there's one thing that stands out. You formulate a product and say, this is what this thing needs to do. you work down the path and say, this is what differentiates this product. This is why we should do it. But then you go onto the development path, and the clock keeps on ticking. And then people come and say, it's so important for us to treat the new patient because we have all these investors and people now expecting that this device should come to market, but we're a little bit delayed here. Can we de-scope, right? So then you start de-scoping and you start saying, it's going to be okay. Maybe it doesn't have to peel the bananas, right? But it could just be that peeling the bananas feature probably was exactly the thing that would give it the differentiating angle. So when we entered with ProCure and we said we can limit these gain entry angles, and he ended up, this device was kind of completely, it was like having a racing car, but the parking brake is on the fifth notch. I mean, you just cannot get it in top gear, right? And that is only because to meet the timeline. So you really need to manage the timelines better and make sure you're not de-scoping key features. So when it comes down to Leo right now here, that financial pressure is always there. And can you stick to the guns and say, this is the minimal set of stuff that this thing needs to be able to do. And so we have a couple of things, and I'd love to walk through these things. We're about halfway down that path. And the pressure is certainly mounting because I think we have a much better grip. We're working with a team that is very well experienced in this medical device manufacturing environment, and entrepreneurs. And they're pushing back when we tend to want to let the scope creep a little bit. But at the end of the day, don't scope back. I always say once you fall back, it's very, very hard to fall forward again. So try and stick to the minimum set of specs, and there's nothing wrong with staging it. It has any product has to be staged. I mean, you cannot go to the final product if you want to have all the features in, but pick your goals and stick to those, and do not compromise. It's better to let the timeline slip a little bit than to de-scope key features.
Yeah, I can imagine that being very important in a long development cycle, such as medical devices. Because once you scope down, if you want to scope up, you many times have to go back again and do it all again. So it may not make a lot of sense doing so. How did you find your partners? I mean, clinical partners, technology companies who have been working together alongside on your projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very, very important question. So often, a lot of these things are driven by finances, and you get a person that want to put a lot of money in and said, I got all this money, I got this idea, can we develop it, right? This time around with Leo was kind of the opposite direction. I know Rock Mackey for a very long time. In fact, the first time just shortly after I moved to the United States, I participated with Rock in filing a grant application to do rotation proton therapy, and that grant didn't succeed. But I've always been in touch with Rock and his innovative spirit. But then about 2-3 years ago, it was very clear to me that the writing is on the wall for proton therapy. We cannot have proton therapy, and also the clinical, the driving thing behind me was always the clinical results. So I knew that the patients will benefit big time. But it's been blocked by people that think these things are just too expensive. They can't have it. So let's block the development of proton therapy, because if proton therapy comes in, I might not be able to get it, and so then I'm going to lose my patients that I treat on my proton machines. So I started. The question is, how do you find your partners? So I started looking at who are the leaders in the industry, and who are the people that are thinking, in my mind, are thinking correctly. And so what do you need in terms of people supported clinically, people that can develop great software to do it, and then people that know what product to develop. I've been starting to talk to Rock for quite a long time, and I think it was 2 or 3 Astros ago, I convened a meeting between a bunch of role players and I told them this meeting can be the start of a huge innovation that will change the shape and face of radiation therapy. And today we're working with all 5 of those members that was in that meeting that day. And I started the meeting and saying, this meeting we'll look back at this meeting 10, 15 years ago and say, that's the meeting that started revolutionizing. So how do I choose my partners? You have to go figure out who's the people that think alike and see that ultimate vision. And now what I'm talking here is about upright treatments. How do we go back to the future, right? How do we go back forward to the past, I mean, all radiation therapy patients were treated seated in the early days. Then we start lying them down, and now we start looking back at the history, and we can clearly see why did we go to lying down, and why did people believe people should be treated lying down and not uprighted. So finally, I have people like Rock and other people and the folks in Cozy Lab, and I'm glad to share this with the Aerofast community, that we start looking at this and say, you know, I'll bore you with two other quotes here. The one is my favorite one of Henry Ford. Henry Ford said, if we'd asked the people what they needed or what they want, they would say, give me faster horses. You know, I want to go faster, but give me faster horses. But he knew that the industry needed cars. So he started developing cars, right? The other thing is that Schopenhauer said that, you know, any new technology, its first is, you know, it's kind of said it's not necessary, and then it's ridiculed, and then the third step, it's just accepted as obvious. Yeah. So right now, when it comes to upright treatments, when we start looking at patient comfort and everything, then we believe the paradigm is to shift radiation therapy into rotating the patient instead of rotating the beam. Mm-hmm. And that has so many other pluses from a workflow perspective. And finally, I was able to team up with Rock that 100% share that vision. Other folks, Stephen, our CEO, and Harry, everybody is in agreement. And now we have a common goal to democratize protons. Democratize is not my word, there's other people using that word. And I think it's make it available to more people was my primary goal why I moved to the United States anyhow.
Where do you think proton therapy is evolving from where it is now? What do you think is the next big thing?
Yeah, I mean, I already alluded to that in my previous question. You know, I think the next big thing for proton therapy is to realize, because the Bragg peak, you have the Bragg peak, protons stop, carbon ions stop. We don't need the same number of beams to treat the patient. If you don't need the same number of beams, plus you have the benefit of fence-free scanning, there is absolutely no need to build these expensive gantry systems. These gantry systems is enormous, always force you to build a new building. And finally, with the reimbursement woes that proton therapy is going through lately, everybody starts saying, you know, ought to be a better paradigm. The other thing is that Thomas Bortfeld published a paper just recently showing how incredible amount of money the industry can save by the benefit of not having to deal with side effects, right? And the proton side effects is vastly reduced. The cure rate is fairly the same because we still give the same dose. But if you can get more patients treated with protons, the impact on the health industry will be massive. But how do we do that? And so here you have a situation that if I can rotate the patient, I don't have to build these big buildings. I can use existing infrastructure, and I now have money left to add the image guidance features that we really need to make proton therapy better. So we soon, I believe, within the next 2 or 3 years, we'll be able to do proton therapy almost an order of magnitude better than we can do right now, with a significant reduction, and that will give us that the mass production, so that we can bring costs down. So the next step, blatantly stated, is upright treatments for both X-rays and proton therapy. Because once we do it in protons, we might as well do it in X-rays, and then the workflow is the same. The benefit to the patient comfort, and that will actually really translate well. People think it's more complicated. Actually, it's far, far simpler. So that's the future for proton therapy.
So it seems to me that you're pretty much spearheading that evolution here with Leo Cancer Care. Look, moving more on a personal side, what's your measure of personal success?
I mean, there's many angles there, but the primary angle is to be able to look back and say, did you make a difference? Did you contribute to a difference? What I poured into my career, yes. Did I make some money? Of course, we all have that desire to make some money, but that money doesn't matter. You can't take anything with you to the grave. What you can leave behind is a legacy to say, yes, you did contribute to make proton therapy and carbon ion therapy and radiation therapy. We did contribute to bring that to more people, and having people going through the radiation therapy process with less of an impact on their bodies. And ultimately, that's the goal. You can look back and say, did you make a difference or not?
Yeah. I can imagine, yeah. Now, just to sum it up, maybe just specifically to our listeners, what would be one most important advice that you would give to a medical device startup, a new group that is starting an innovation?
Yeah, I think the best advice is just don't get emotionally attached to a specific design. Because once you get emotionally attached and say, this is the thing, there's nothing beyond this, then you're going to start thinking, what you've done is the ultimate. I think you should really rejoice in somebody that comes up with something better than what you've done. So you should strive for the best design, but never get emotionally attached to that design. If an engineer comes back and say, well, your idea is great, but why don't we do that? You ought to be able to say, maybe you're right. Let's consider it. Prove to me. And so that just also then plays into the fact is that device really needed? And the way you think about it, is that really what the industry needs? Is that what's going to make the difference? And then you have to always think in terms of money. You need to have people, you need to have a product, and you need to have money to make it successful. If you don't have the money, endless money, then you need to generate the money. So you ultimately have a product that can be commercialized.
Yeah. I'm sure our listeners are pleased to hear that advice. Thank you very much, Niek, for taking the time. I know it's very precious. I know you're running to another meeting, but thanks again in the name of Aerofast and Pozia.
Well, I just want to end and say I'm really excited about the Aerofast initiative. I very few times in my life I've seen such an innovative, such a great idea. And we live and die by innovation. The day we stop innovating, the day we might as well stop being in this field.
Yeah. Thank you, Niek. I'll see you soon.